And it says we're live. Welcome, everyone, to my first ever live stream. And thank you very much for John Buck for being here for this inaugural stream. History is being made right now, right here. And hopefully some people will be along for the ride or come and watch later. So this is going to be a discussion, not a debate on free will. I think I lean more towards the free will, probably doesn't exist, and I think John leads more to the free will probably does exist. And we're going to go through our views on free will, talk a little bit about concept of free won't, and if there's anybody in the chat, please speak up and ask questions or join in, and we'd love to have you. So John, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Brett, for bringing me on here. I know you and I interact quite a bit already on the Beverly channel, but yeah, so I'm just a nobody. I like to do some writing in my spare time and having different philosophical conversations and debates, things like that. So, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and yeah, we met a few months ago now. We've been having some great discussions, especially about this John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. So everybody, I'll add later on to the show notes links to the Beverly channel, where we've had over a dozen streams, I think, on this great series, going through sort of present sort of this secular way of looking at meaning and meaning generation and how to fix maybe some of the problems. But that's another topic for other days. So we're going to talk about free will now, and I guess and just for the audience. So this is going to be a discussion, not a debate. We're looking at exploring this together. We're not trying to just show each other up. We're trying to work together, trying to understand each other's arguments and positions, and sort of see this as a mutual process where we're trying to figure this out together. It's sort of what I like this channel to be is trying sort of a different approach, a less combative approach, a more discussion-oriented approach to the topics that we see debated, all throughout YouTube, and see if it generates some better results. I'm going to be having some videos where I go a lot more into my ideas on good communication and trying it out. And so we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah. So like a Socratic dialogue in a way, just continual asking questions of one another to kind of get a better understanding for each other's positions. I dig it.
That right. So I guess I can give my basic view first. I'll just give maybe a little summary of how I see it. Maybe you can then give a little summary of how you see it, and then we can just get into free discussion. I really, I call
free
formal
discussion.
Debates free. What is it free? Well, yeah, I'm not a big fan. I mean, I enjoy formal debates, but I think of them as sort of structured ish galloping, where basically you just have these times where people set out a whole bunch of arguments, and the other side has to try to remember or write down everything, and you lose any kind of flow of discussion. So this is really going to be much more focused on the back and forth. So my position on go ahead.
I was just gonna ask you. So, what do you think What do you think determinism means? Why do you think that we have it, and what do you think that you gain, or what does this belief provide for you as well? Because that's also some other aspect that I don't think ever really gets into with the normal debates. It's like what are the practical benefits or detriments to the beliefs that we hold?
Right, and getting into that, I mean, I guess that whether it has benefits or detriments is a separate question from whether it's true or not true, or whether we believe it or not believe it. That said, I think there are some positive benefits to not believe
that could be one of the positive benefits, is like, because I want to only believe true things, this provides me with a true belief that I can hold.
So my basic view is not that I say I know we don't have free will, but I can't conceive of how free will in the classic libertarian sense could work. I'm definitely open to uh, an understanding or a model of free will that can sort of explain in a way that I think is coherent for free will to exist. But as I see it, we're sort of locked in this dichotomy of determinism and randomness. And so I'm not a hard determinist in the sense that I think everything must be determined and have just a set order from beginning to end. I'm open to randomness being a real thing. It depends on quantum mechanics, whether there's different formulations of quantum mechanics. I think there are deterministic versions, there are non-deterministic versions. I don't think it really matters, because I think most people probably agree that random doesn't say free will. So random doesn't mean free. So I see determinism and randomness as a dichotomy. And I know Henry Stapp, who's a physicist, he sort of tried to explain it as a trichotomy, saying there's random, determined, and free. And from what I've read from him, he sort of states it, but from what I could understand, he didn't really seem to have the details of how this free operates. So there's a thought experiment that I'm not sure if, I know versions of it I heard before. I know I came up with my version a number of years ago, but I think there are various versions of this that help me place my views on free will. And hi Concept Hut, thank you for watching. And and as a nice quote from Christopher Hitchens, yes, I have free will, I have no choice but to have it. And I should say he's quoting an atheist, Christopher Hitchens. I'm a non-theist, and John is a theist. Just people want to know our general backgrounds. But I think we're I don't know. We'll see if that comes into play. So the thought experiment is this: if we could reverse time back to the smallest instant before our last decision. So call it a Planck time before our last decision. Reversing the state of the universe. So the state of the universe is reversed exactly to how it was at that moment. Could we make a different decision? So having chosen A, if we reverse time back to that state of the universe, and we don't know, so we have no memory of having chosen A, we're just back to how it was. Could we have chosen B? And as I see it, sort of taking the state of the universe, absent perhaps randomness coming in, it seems to me that we're always going to make that same decision again. Or again, if randomness comes in, we may make a different decision, but it seems to me, given the state of the universe, we're going to make that decision again. And then you could go back a Planck length before that, and a Planck length before that, and a Planck length before that. And we could keep on repeating this sort of Laplace's demon style analysis. And it seems what we get is this chain of cause and effect, maybe with randomness, that doesn't provide for free will. Now, I think I'll save some of this for the discussion, because I think we'll get into it. I mean, my position is frankly, it either doesn't matter if we have free will, or if it does matter, there are some definite benefits, maybe some downsides to our thoughts about free will, and some benefits to our thoughts about free will. But I think the way I see it, and I'll wrap it up after this, because I don't want to go too long. We live in the world as it is. We have meaning in our lives. We make decisions. We have things that are important to us. We have morality that plays a role. So we either have free will or we don't have free will. As it is right now, we're not trying to figure out. Our thoughts about free will don't make us have free will. So it's not like if we have free will, suddenly everything changes. We figure out we have free will, everything changes. We figure out we don't have free will, everything changes. No, we're trying to describe things as they are. We're trying to define our experience. And so a lot of people will say, well, if you don't have free will, all these things are out the window. Well, no, all those things are still there because, again, we either have free will and those things, all those things that have meaning for you, all those, morality, and we'll get more into morality, and we'll get more into, justice, and, and whether people are at fault, responsibility. And again, I think they still are, whether or not we have free will. All those things still play a role. Whether or not we have free will, we're just trying to figure out how to classify it. We know these concepts play a strong role in our society. They have a great sense of meaning for us. So it's not like if we figure out it's one or the other, suddenly it changes the reality of the impact of these benefits and of these effects of life. So last thing. Oh, and thank you. Thanks, Phalanx. Nice to join us. And he's asked, there's two questions. First, Concept Hut's asking, please define random. The way I define random is uncaused by prior events. And again, I don't have a firm position on whether true randomness exists. I mean, when we flip a coin, we call it random, but of course it's really determined. But quantum physics seems to leave the door open that there is true randomness out there. Again, different interpretations there. To me, I don't think it makes a huge difference in terms of free will, because even if there is randomness, that doesn't mean free. Do I choose to have the discussion? Yes, we do. And I think I'll hold this part for, because I've talked for a while now, and I think we're going to be getting into it a little later, but we make choices, whether, I'll just give a preview. We have will. We make choices, we make deliberations. The question, we don't want to make the mistake of equating will with free will. We have will, we have intent, we have agency. The question is whether it's free or not.
Like whether it's self-directed?
Well, and I'll get into that as well, because I see us as systems, as I really see us as as information processing systems, and well, let me hold this for a bit, because I've talked for a while, okay, and I want to let you talk, and
sure.
I know what's going to come up as we get into this. So let me turn it over to you, John, and
all right. So just
hear your view.
I want to see if I can not necessarily steelman, but at least like kind of get those three questions that I kind of had. So like, what does determinism mean, where the prior state of events necessarily causes the later state of events due to that so like necessarily caused by prior events. And for random, it would be like not necessarily caused by random events. So it could be, oops, sorry.
Are the aliens coming?
Does that seem like an adequate enough sort of description of determinism?
Yeah, I'm always wary of the term necessary, because to me it assumes some sort of,
well, like it
agency,
could not follow any other way.
Sure, but sure, I think that's a fair
and for like a random event, it could follow some other way.
Well, no, but it's more than that, because I think it's that it's uncaused by prior events, that it's not linked to the prior event.
I don't know if that
breaks
like,
the chain.
So like when within quantum mechanics, like the idea is like, say you have a 50% reflective piece of like colored silver or glass, or to where you shoot a photon at it at a 45-degree angle, and it will either bounce off the reflective part or it'll pass through. And that's what's usually kind of thought to be as like a random event, where you have no understanding of what the photon is going to do. It's either going to reflect or it's going to pass through. And so that's like, I would still say that the photon passing through was caused by me shooting the photon. But I would say the same thing if the photon bouncing off was also caused by me shooting the photon. So it was caused by something prior, but it was not in such a way where you could determine what the photon was going to do prior. But that would just be an epistemic claim about the nature of not being able to understand what's going to happen.
So two things there. You could, the question we have is it just that we don't have the ability to calculate? Maybe it is really determined, we just can't figure it out, or is it truly random? Now remember, when I'm talking about, because we've talked about this briefly off stream, when I'm talking about causation, I'm really going instant by instant. So I'm not talking about, at one point you shoot it, and that's in the chain of causation. If it's random, at one point there's a break from that chain of causation, and it either passes through or doesn't pass through. I'm not talking about the fact that there is still a line. There's still, even with a random event, there would still be a chain we can.
Well, assuming determinism is true, where is that there is that causal linking of chains going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, exactly like that.
Well, even if randomness is true, I mean, I'm not saying, the like it's
because there's certain,
because you shot it or not, or didn't shoot it, right? So that has to be in the chain of causation. But whether it actually goes through or not may be determined, or it may be unrelated to, your position of shooting it.
Okay, so the
timing of it, the speed.
We might get into that a little bit later, because I did a bit of research on quantum mechanics for my simulation debate, and I know you kind of we talked a bit about that during preparation for that. But okay,
but just be careful with that, because I don't know if we need to get into that, because I don't think, like,
if it is random, it would still be outside of our control. Yeah.
Right. It's still not free. So for this conversation, we may not need to get into that.
Okay. So the three questions: what does determinism mean, where the prior state of events causes the current state of events in such a way that it could not be any other, so that it could not be any other way? Why do we have free will? Because we cannot conceive of a way in which we do have free will. It seems that there is this dichotomy where things are either predetermined through reasons or the states of events of the universe, or they are random, also sort of outside of our control. And there's no sort of third option from that dichotomy. And then what do we get from it? There are certain psychological reasons, and I think this is something I didn't
really get into that part yet, but we've talked about it a bit off stream.
But I think it's true. There's this. It seems that there are studies that show that people that are go through some sort of priming, or take a test, or where they're shown this quote from, I think it's Francis Crick or James Watson, about how we don't have free will. They are more if they were to be questioned as to how they're going to punish a criminal, and say they're given these two options where you put the criminal through a sort of rehabilitation program where they pay back their dues to society for whatever crime they committed, versus this other punishment where they do all the same things, but there's also an added bit of punishment for making them suffer more for what they did. The people that do not believe in free will are more likely to choose the less aggressive option for the people, because there's no moral reason for retribution, it seems, for them. All right. So those are kind of the three reasons. If I was to kind of go over my three reasons why I think free will is more important. For one, I don't think determinism is factually correct, as I might bring up later with quantum mechanics. I don't think that the world works in sort of this Newtonian clock of one state of affairs causing the next state of affairs in a necessary way.
John, sorry, I actually disconnected.
You just cut out
for a bit there.
Okay.
So I missed about a minute there.
A whole minute? We were talking.
So
I wonder if you were frozen.
No.
Oh, okay.
I was frozen. And hold on, is the chat? Let's see, is the chat back? Hold on.
It should still be working fine. Even if you drop out of the call, Zoom will still be uploading to YouTube or streaming to YouTube.
Sure. Okay. That's good. It says unable to connect to chat. Hold on. Let me just do test. Okay, it looks like it's
okay. Yeah.
Looks like it. Did you see test
Yep.
in the
I
chat?
see it.
Okay.
Okay.
So sorry about that. So if you can
No.
again.
Yeah. Okay. So my three reasons, if I was to sort of ask the same questions to myself, what do I think that determinism means? I'd agree with your, well, I would say that yes, determinism would mean that the prior state of events causes the present state of events in such a way that it could not be any other way because of it.
Sure.
Like it necessarily follows from it. And I actually do think that there are certain things that are deterministic, like a kind of chain of dominoes following one after the other, where because of the fact that there's a domino behind it, it's going to hit it, and then because it's going to fall because of that. There's no other way that it could do because of the dominoes moving it. Why do I think that we have free will? I think, as I might bring in with quantum mechanics, but I think there are certain models which do make sense of free will and also go about going about kind of rebutting the arguments that are laid out for determinism. Especially like the one that you just laid out, where it's either indeterminism is true or determinism is true. And also just from a pragmatic standpoint, I do think that while there are certain benefits we might get from belief in determinism, I think there are also detriments that might very well outweigh the benefits that we might get. So there are certain other psychological studies that show that if somebody believes that they have believes that they don't have free will, they're going to be more likely, if given the opportunity, to cheat for a test, to steal money if they have the ability to do so without getting caught, and also act aggressively towards people that they get a chance to do so, for people that they don't like. So while we can kind of have a bit of, I guess, mercy for those that, for other people that we think couldn't have done it any other way, I think that we have that same sort of mercy for ourselves and allowing us to do things that we wouldn't normally want ourselves to go through. So yeah, I don't think that free will or that determinism is factually correct. I don't think it's practically viable. Like, I think the mere fact that we act as if we have free will, that we make choices and are morally responsible for our choices. If we were to believe in determinism, this would be like an inconsistency, which I wouldn't want to have for myself. And that's not to say that it proves free will is true. It's just the fact that we would have to hold a sort of moral, a philosophically inconsistent worldview in which we act differently. And the fact that I don't think it's conducive for creating a moral society, like psychologically speaking, for people.
All right, so there's a few things, a few ways we can go. Well, first, I'll just do a quick steelman of your position. Now, I think we agree basically on how we're defining determinism and randomness, so we don't have to go through this. Now, so you accept that some things are determined,
mm-hmm.
But you hold that there are models that I guess leave open a spot for free will, and would that be? I mean, you would probably say though that even in our thoughts and our decision making, some things are still determined there, or would you say every thought we have is?
No. In fact, so yeah, this is something that I guess William James sort of laid out for his model of free will, is that there are kind of a two-stage process of free will. There's chance and then there's choice. So our thoughts are not under our control. Things will pop into our heads, different, like say I have this feeling that I'm hungry. And so I'll think, where are some places that I might eat? And then say like Red Robin pops into my head, or McDonald's pops into my head, or Panera Bread. These are like different thoughts that kind of pop into my head. And then, so that is where chance comes up. These are random, like certain restaurants don't pop into my head, or eating at home. Say like that might not pop into my head just because I already ate at home yesterday or something like that. Then there is choice, where from this scope, I guess, of random things that pop into my head, I can choose among them so as to fulfill my goal. So yes, it is true that it's because I'm hungry that I will choose one of these options, but it's not the case that my hunger necessitated a specific option. It was rather due to my own choice in sort of a, like, I don't know, individual kind of consciousness choosing things. And I think phenomenologically, you can kind of experience what it's like to have free will, or like a very clear-cut example of what it feels like, at least, to have free will, where if you're, say, in a crowded bar or something like that, and there's different conversations and TVs that are going on around you, if you focus on it, you can selectively choose where you're listening, to where you're listening to a certain group of people over to your right, or a certain group of people over to your left. And all of the inputs are going to be the same. You're like, everybody's still talking at all of the same volume, and they're still talking about the same types of things. But it is the fact that phenomenologically speaking, we can direct our attention, which, at least for me, seems sufficient enough to build a basis of free will off of. It's the directing of attention and then acting upon it.
So I definitely agree that we have this feeling of free will, and I agree with you that we can selectively focus our will. So I agree with, we're in a crowded room and we can focus on things. You could do it right now. You could right now, I could say focus on your hand, and suddenly you will feel your hand where you didn't feel it before. You weren't paying attention to it before. It was still there, but now you're focused on it. Now you've talked about choice. And I agree we have choice. The question is, do you differentiate between free choice and unfree choice? Or are you defining choice as free by definition?
Yeah, so I don't think that choice makes much sense if the only possible result is the one in which we do result. So like, say say I have 3 cups, and you know that there is a ball hidden underneath one of the cups. But I'm a sleight of hand magician, so that no matter which choice you make, I'm going to reveal the cup in such a way that the ball is not shown to you. That seems to me sort of like a false choice. I think that's actually the term that's used by magicians, is like a false choice or a magician's choice, or something like that. That seems to me like not an instance where choice really makes sense. And I think that if determinism is true, we get sort of a similar situation there.
So here's where I'd like to pause and let's look at choice. What's going on with the choice? And we all, how much of choice do we really have access to? You talked about the choices popping into our head. You call that chance. Now, I'm not sure that it's chance. We just don't have access to how certain things pop into our head. I mean, so just for background, I lean towards an integrated information theory, which is that consciousness is a fundamental property that occurs when information is integrated. So it's sort of in this feedback loop, and our brains are particularly good integrated information systems. So I see choice as a type of information processing, some of which we have access to consciously, a lot of which we don't have access to consciously. Like, when I feel hungry, so what pops into my head? I could make some chicken that I have in my fridge. I could go out to McDonald's or Burger King, or Wimpy's just popped into my head. So why did these 3 restaurants pop into my head? Maybe they're close proximity to me. I drive by them all the time, but it could have been a Swiss Chalet or Harvey's or Wendy's. Why didn't those three pop into my head? I have no access to why those three didn't pop into my head. And when I make a choice between those three, when I introspect on that, I'll sort of think, and by thinking, I sort of wait and I see which one do I want. I can ask myself that question, which one do I want? And a feeling pops in my head. Oh, McDonald's. And that's what I do. No, I should eat healthier tonight. I'm going to heat up my chicken. But so if we really break down what is happening when we make a choice, if we to that bit by bit, I mean, think of all the things going on there we don't have access to, the words we use, the order of our thoughts, the feelings we have. The more I push in, the less I discover I sort of controlled. It sort of seems to happen. My deliberation happens, but there's so much of my deliberation that I don't have access to. And like the next, as Sam Harris will say, the next thought that pops in your head, you don't know what that thought is going to be before it happens. It just happens. The next word I'm going to say, how did I choose the next word as the three words that I said there? I don't have access to that. And what it seems like is it's information processing in the brain. It goes to where the words are held. There are a bunch of different words that I could have used in that situation. Somehow my brain chooses the word to say that. Then it comes into my consciousness and I say them.
Right. Okay. So this is an interesting thing. Like, do you identify with your brain, or do you only identify with a certain part of your brain? I don't know, maybe your prefrontal cortex or something like that.
I mean, I don't identify at all with my prefrontal cortex. I don't have access to that. I can understand through neuroscience that there's this area of the brain that tends to light up for certain thoughts. We have this sense of self. I don't think that's questionable. We have this sense of self. I have the sense of self as much as anyone. When I think of integrated information, this is like a theoretical model that scientists have come up with. I don't identify with this model, but this model, and by the way, I mean, it's a relatively new theory, the last 15 or so years, I think, or maybe 20 when it was first proposed. I'm not 100% on it. I think it seems to be going in the right direction. I think they're on to something with integrated information theory, but it helps. I guess there's some intuitive attraction I have to it. It makes sense to me. But I don't want to, it helps me situate, it helps me, formulate how I sort of see it. But so if I'm an information processing system, I mean, this information processing operates in this web of cause and effect. I'm still an agent, meaning it is my brain. It is me making these decisions. So in that sense, I identify with my decision-making system. I am the one doing it. It's not, so it's not, so it's sort of like libertarian.
This is where you're more compatibilist, right? Where you think that, yes, cause and effect is true. Everything is determined either by randomness or determinism. But the thing is, there's also the self, that's part of that system. And that's something that also does causes, even if there were prior antecedent causes that caused the self to kind of reach these conclusions.
Yes, like, and I'm a little iffy on whether I say I ascribe to compatibilism. I think it just means, we're seeing sort of, is someone not holding a gun to my head, then it's free. And I agree with that. I think what a lot of people tend to forget when they're thinking of this cause and effect is that we are part of this chain of cause and effect, or I call it a web, because it's, it's not just like A to B to C. It's like, it's a matrix of causes and effects, which is, incredibly complex, probably beyond most of our ability to, like, Laplace's demon really can't operate in real life.
All right, so let's see. So far, I see at least three things in which we agree on. We agree that there is a self, and especially a sense of self. We agree that there is at least a sense of free will where we can focus our attention at will, whether this is without, but okay, we'll get into that later. So self and feeling of free will. I do agree with you that the thoughts that pop into our heads are basically random or outside of our control. So thoughts out of control. And there was another one. And I do agree that there are certain things that are deterministically caused. And we agree on the definition of determinism, I believe.
Yeah.
All right. So it might be interesting to, if we agree that there is a self, and we agree that that self is one of the things causing our choices. Now, I guess we can think about, like, if the fact that our choices were made to prior things outside of our control, does that make it so that they were, we don't have free will, I guess?
Well, again, control is a weird thing. Like, I think we have control in that sense that, you know, in a colloquial sense, at least, like I'm happy to say we have control, meaning it's our choices, our system. You know, like you said, in a room, I can choose to focus on my attention one way versus another way. I can engage in meditation practice where I choose to focus my attention on my breath or on sounds or whatnot. So but the system. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that to me seems very much like an active process, whereas for most things that are deterministic, that seems very much like a passive process, where there are things that are happening without my focusing or intending to perform this action at all. So, like, thoughts.
Wait, but why should we differentiate between active and passive in terms of whether it's free or not? Why can't something be caused in this chain of causation, but still have this sense of activity to it? Like, I don't know that like, I think we have to get away from the feeling. We all agree we have this feeling, right? We have when you're talking about active, that seems to me to be talking about the feeling. You know, we feel active. It's not that it's active or passive. That's how we describe it, right? It's, you know, but it's whether it's part of this kind of causation or not. Well, I mean, like if we take my thought experiment of reversing time. I mean, what's your take on that?
Right. So
if you go back in time to the state, you rewind the state of the universe to the instant before you make a decision, absent randomness, could you have chosen a different option, and how?
See, the thing is, whenever using the terms like rewind time, it seems like so say in universe A, John chooses to go to Subway for dinner. Now, we rewind time in universe A. Does John still choose to pick Subway? That seems to me like if I freely chose to pick Subway in universe A, and I rewound time, it would always be the same way. So, like, if I was video recording somebody and for what they did, like they were walking down and then they came to a pathway, do they turn left or right? Oh, they turned right. Now let's rewind the videotape. Oh, they're turning right again. Oh, I'll rewind it again. Oh, they're turning right again. Every single time they went right, but it seems like they would still have chosen, like, it's not because of the state of the universe. It's
not
because
about
of their choice.
Well, let's go back to that. Do you think? Well, let me just address what you said earlier, and maybe this will help. Like you said, you know, if we choose something and it's not free, it doesn't seem like a choice. But if we look at what choice is, to me, what choice is a deliberation process. It's an information processing process where our brain is calculating, where we're calculating based on options that come to our our consciousness or even subconsciousness, that that in our mind, we, whether it's conscious or not, we have certain options and we do calculations,
Sort of like an
and
algorithm being run.
Right, where like a computer can make a choice if you program it that way, and we're sort of programmed to make choices as well. If we break down what's going on in a choice, I don't think the freedom, it being free, is a necessary inclusion. We still, we deliberate. There's no question. I think we deliberate, right? We have things we know of, which are called our options, and we think about them. We have feelings about them. We have thoughts about them. We make logical deductions about them or inferences. We do this deliberation whether we're free or not. So it seems to me that choice is there again, whether we're free or not, or that the question isn't, do we have choices? The question is, should we properly categorize these choices as free or determined with maybe some random?
All right. So Concept Hut raised a question for me, and I just realized that we didn't really properly agree upon or even define what we would have, like, if free will were a thing, what would we imagine it to look like? So and his exact question is, anything ever free, full stop? If not, what do you think the term free is being applied to in the term free will? So I can imagine a universe in which there is a entity that has full access to taking either pathway A or pathway B. And there is no other cause or external aspect to the universe that is forcing either one of these options to be procured by the entity X. I would think that would be an instance of something with free will, where they can take either option A or B.
Why are you not? But aren't you there? Aren't you? So you're there just differentiating between decisions that are made from outside versus inside. But why are you excluding your system, yourself, from this cause and effect? That almost sounds like a compatibilist definition that you've just given, and I'd probably agree with that one. That it's totally from within. We would call it free. Compatibly free. When it's someone's pointing the gun at your head from outside, we would say it's compatibly not free. And sorry, I didn't realize my chat had frozen. I just reset it. So CM Bradley, welcome. Thank you for joining. Thanks for being here. And so sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we'd have to kind of understand what it would mean then, because to me it seems that if the cause of our actions is our own self, that seems like a sufficient understanding from the libertarian understanding, as yes, I'm a self-causing, I'm a prime mover of my own actions. I'm choosing what I'm doing and I'm acting upon it.
Okay, well, what do you mean by I and cause there? What are the
sense of self, consciousness? So that which is conscious, that which can focus its attention, that which we identify with. Like when I have the cogito ergo sum, that's the I'd imagine.
I'm just hesitant to say that does it. To me, that sounds like how would you differentiate that from compatibilism? That to me sounds like what compatibilism is talking about, that the differentiating between force from outside versus for example, we talked about these thoughts that pop in your head that we have no access to. That's happening wholly within, but we don't call it free, right? So how does that mesh with what you've just set out?
Sure. Okay. So I wrote out this argument against compatibilism. I don't know how much you're going to disagree or agree with it or not, because, all right. So premise one, if determinate, should I, yeah, I'll share the screen actually. Let's see if I can. Oh, there we go. So it's the green button. I always forget. All right.
A lot of people identifying with various things in the chat. So,
all right. Argument against compatibilism. If determinism is true, then possibilities other than the result were unable to be achieved, making them impossible. And I think that's fairly close to what we were saying determinism meant. Premise 2, choice is the action of taking one possibility over others. Okay, yes. And I can see certain ways in which maybe the compatibilists would agree with that. But P2 requires multiple possibilities. So this is where maybe we should discuss what possibility means.
Yeah, because, well, like, I think you're equivocating there. I think your two possibilities are possibly different. Your possibilities in P1, I think, is different than your possibility of P2. That I think in P1 you're saying there are, if determinism is true, then different results other than the result were unable to be achieved. In P2, I think you're saying choice is the action of taking like one deliberation over another, or falling on one result of deliberation over another. Like I think they're slightly different, because we have to, and this gets back into
so yeah, that's a good point.
Actual and potential. Yeah.
So it seems like we're talking about, like, within premise 1, it seems like possibilities is referring to like an ontological, actual, real, objective something called possibilities. Whereas within 2, it's a sort of subjective understanding of a possibility. Like, oh, it seems like I could go to Taco Bell, even though I'm going to choose to go to Subway otherwise. And that's at least a subjective, basis for what we mean by possibility. Now, let's see. If we instead think about 2, so like the person that believes in free will, or even maybe the hard determinist, they say that in order for somebody to be morally held responsible for their actions, then alternative possibilities must have been available to them, which is why, like, you'll have determinists say that, oh, people that end up in prison, it wasn't due to their own like intention to be evil or do these crimes. It was just the basis, like, that's why they don't hold them morally responsible.
And now and that I want to maybe hold morality aside just for this part, because I do want to talk about that, but I think we're gonna, if we get onto morality, we're gonna lose this.
Okay, yeah. All right, so let's imagine premise 2 then is referring to the ontological basis of possibility, where, like, for somebody, like, from my own point of view, in order for, let's maybe refer to it as free choice.
Wait, well, hold on. Let me say, you say choice is the action, but is it the action or the decision?
I suppose possibly the decision, because, like, I can imagine things where somebody will decide to do something, but the fact of the matter is that they're unable to enact it exactly.
Right. So in that context, like, we have possibilities that we deliberate. So we think of, again, McDonald's. I'm hungry. McDonald's, Burger King, and Taco Bell pop into my mind, and I decide on one of them. Right. So so maybe we should use options instead of possibilities. Maybe that's a better word.
Yeah.
That we have multiple options, but it's only possible to decide that only one. Well, like options are what we include in our deliberative procedure.
Right. Okay. So this really gets into, I don't know, maybe our theories of what rationality is, because I think that in order for something to be, like, say I had this rational idea about an option, and if I'm not referring to something that has some sort of objective basis, then I'm being sort of irrational. Like, I might have the idea that I have the ability to do other options, or I might have the idea that I have free will. But if I'm not actually referring to something with some sort of objective basis or ontological basis, then this would be a delusion. And so like that's where
Okay,
I think
but we can have delusional. We can
yeah,
deliberate
and our
between things
delusions
that don't
can affect
exist.
our behavior. That's certainly true. But okay, so it from like I recognize that the act of deliberation over alternative options is a subjective process. Now, premise 2 is referring to if that subjective process is referring to ontological realities. So where options are real things.
Well, but wait, but hold on. You added free, but I think we have to hesitate before adding in free. If we say choice is the decision of taking one option over the other, I think the decision doesn't have to be ontologically possible. I can decide to fly, right? The fact that I can't fly doesn't mean I can't decide to fly. I mean, I could just make the choice. I'm going to fly. I can then jump out a window and fall to my death, but I still made the choice to fly, even though I can't ontologically fly. So I think so. Choice would be the decision, and again, the decision could be a free decision or an unfree decision, and so it's not a question of do we make choices, because we do. We make decisions, we deliberate, we calculate in our minds between different options that come to our mind that we know of. Obviously, we can't choose between options that we don't know of, so it has to be in our brain. And some of those options will come to our mind, and some won't. When I make a choice of what restaurant I can go, I'm forgetting about dozens of other restaurants I know of. It's only a few restaurants that come to mind, but I can make that decision, and that decision is based on what restaurants came to my mind and my feeling in my tummy when I think of McDonald's. I'm sick of McDonald's. I don't want to do that. Burger King feels good, or I want to go to Swiss Chalet, but that's a little expensive, so I'm not going to go there. Like all these things we can sort of track. If we break down these decisions, I think the more we break them down, the further we get from what I try to think of as free. It's hard to picture how free works other than just stating it as free. Like, where is the free? Because I think we can, if we break it down to the instant by instant, the literally one thought, one word after the other, not the macro thinking, where does the free come in?
Right. And this is, I don't know, this doesn't feel like the greatest of arguments, but it is at least something that has some sort of historical basis, where for Kant, who recognizes that for any sort of understanding of morality, there's sort of a prerequisite of choosing among available options, where we certainly have the subjective feeling of having free will, but there is also the counterpart where we cannot think about history other than through this sort of causal deterministic fashion. Now, his sort of workaround for that, in order to retain the conception of morality, was to say that, okay, our conception of causal effects determining the things after themselves is or the whole like understanding of causal history and interaction. This is a way in which this is a description of how our minds understand reality. That's not necessarily the case to say that it has some sort of ontological basis in reality, that everything is causally determined, but rather we cannot think otherwise but through a causally determinate fashion. But like I said, it's not that intuitive, I guess, because I mean, it's still a fact that we do think about things in a causally deterministic fashion.
And or again, or possibly random. Just looking
right.
at the concept had thinks I should try flying. And I've got to get used to it. See, I'm not good at paying attention to what we're saying and reading the chat at the same time. That's a skill I'm going to have to develop over time. So we'll have to do little stops and take a look at the chat. So looking at Concept is saying you can overcome a habit if you preempt it consciously, but the habit is done based on environmental triggers or mental triggers like flushing a toilet type stuff. I think what he's saying, and I agree with that. Yeah, and this gets into the free won't. I think what that you sort of wanted to bring in, John. We can choose to not do things, but I guess we'll come to this, I guess. But my question is, why do we see that as different than as a different process than the choice to do something? I mean, again, the thought that pops into our mind that leads to, even that, okay, I'm going to go to McDonald's. I'm trying to lose weight. That thought pops in my head. I'm trying to lose weight. Okay, I'm not going to. Then I choose not to.
Right. So just to explain it, I guess, for the audience. So there's kind of this classical experiment, I think, done on fMRI by Benjamin Libet, where people are put into a chain or a chair, and they're having their scanners for their brain, and then they're told that to look at a clock that is telling that has like a counting down or to the microsecond, and then to keep track of the time in which they have the conscious feeling to, I'm going to flex my wrist, and then flex their wrist. And what the brain scans showed was that prior to their actual recounting of the time, like what time it was when they had the conscious feeling like, okay, I'm going to flex my wrist. What I think like a third of a second beforehand, there was a spike on the brain scans that was going on. And this is kind of like what a lot of people like Sam Harris use to kind of defend the position that the conscious experience of I'm having a volitional, I'm going to do this thing, had a precursor within our brain prior to our even having the conscious experience, suggesting that it was the very act itself and the conscious experience was predetermined by our brain beforehand. Now, Libet had another experiment where he put people in the same exact scenario, but telling them that, okay, rather than actually flexing your wrist, you can do so or you can choose not to do so, even if you, but still recount like what time it was that you had this feeling. And then there was the same sorts of, or actually no, there were, yes, even when the person didn't flex their wrist, there was still that sort of spike in brain activity. So it seemed to him that there is this, like, I guess kind of bringing in a little bit of William James again, where we'll have the random imparting thing outside of our control to tell us, okay, flex your wrist, or okay, go to McDonald's or go to Subway, something like that. And then we have the capacity to not do those things. And that's the thing. There was no like brain scan precursor to the people that chose not to do the thing. It's not like for every, so like how he described it was the jump or the spike in the brain scans was suggestive of a sort of readiness potential to act, whether you act or not. So like your brain sort of gets ready to act, and then you can choose not to act instead. And there's no like, it would still sort of show up the same in the brain, whether you act or not. It's just that readiness potential that is what we see for the lipid experiments.
Yeah, I should say I'm somewhat skeptical of the accuracy of this type of experiment, actually for a reason similar to what Concept Hut just posted, that people's reaction times are only so fast. He says it's like 30 microseconds or milliseconds. I think there's always going to be some delay between when you consciously realize something and when you note the time or say it. So I think it's a tough one. I think interpreting these spikes or not spikes are different, which is why I sort of focus more on the thought experiment rather than the the neuroscience. I'm not sure our neuroscience is quite there. Although from what I understand, I mean, there's are we correctly interpreting these scans? I mean, some of them, I think I was just reading, go back like 10 or 20 seconds before, which seems a little odd. Now, and I know also, from what I understand, we may live somewhat in the past, that it takes us a short amount of time to calibrate that. What our brains are calibrating reality in a continuous story, but we may actually be, like the sun, was 8 light minutes away from us. So the sun, when you're looking at the sun, the sun could have popped out of existence 8 minutes ago. But
that's true. So like looking at a clock that's ticking, your reading of the clock might come at like what you read from the clock might be later than the actual moment itself. I don't know if that works out. I'd have to think about it more.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm getting at. And I don't have the knowledge to know this, but I mean, I read something that, our brains are always recalibrating even our sense of time. And so I take with a grain of salt these Libet
right. And that might explain sort of like our feeling of deja vu sometimes, where it feels like we're re-experiencing a moment at the same time that we're experiencing it. Even there's sort of this like overlapping of, I don't know, our subjective experience in some ways. So and there's been some other like papers sort of showing how, I think something in the Times, maybe not the Times. There was some like popular or recent papers saying that the Libet experiments didn't really show what a lot of determinists thought they might be.
Yeah, I'd like to see a lot more work done now, and with better calibrated instruments, and figure out ways to do these experiments in much more controlled manners. But I agree, though, a lot of sort of people who are against free will jump on these experiments as, aha, this is the answer. And I'm even though I'm not convinced that we have free will, I think I don't know that these experiments I think of as early experiments that point the way for further research. But it doesn't seem like there's been a ton of follow-up studies. There's been a handful, and again, I think there needs to be a lot more work before we eureka.
Right. Okay. So I think the next place that we could go with this is you had said that you don't think there's really a practical difference between whether we do or do not have free will. I think that there is a practical difference between that. And I think it's a psychological practical difference between whether we think we have it or we do not think that we have it. So maybe we can get into that.
I'm definitely open to that. Now, I'm familiar with the studies that you talked about earlier. Again, I'm a little bit skeptical of some of these psychological priming studies where you sort of read something and then make a decision. Maybe it has some very short-term effects. I suspect if you, I think a lot of it depends on how you sell it and whether it has longer term. A lot of these priming studies are very short. So, you read it, then you do your fake test and, okay, more people cheat.
It's interesting because there's this like a similar test that wasn't done right in the moment, but rather like following a college class where they were doing like looking into neurobiology. That was the class, and they performed the same sort of experiments, like whether they would harshly punish a criminal or not at the beginning of the class and then at the end of the class, and without any sort of priming of like, okay, your brain is deterministically causing you to do this thing, but just by looking at the brain and understanding it as a brain rather than as like a mind. This naturally led to them becoming more, it's not necessarily merciful, but more
less retributive.
Right, exactly, towards the criminals.
And I agree with that. I mean, I have that myself. Now, one thing we have to state, first of all, whether or not there's a different psychological effect based on whether you believe in free will or not is a different question from whether free will is true or not. So So we either have free will and we have a certain belief about free will, or we don't have free will and we have that same belief about free will.
Right.
So when I say I don't think it makes a difference, what I'm talking about is, again, we either have it or we don't. And what a lot of people try to do is say, well, if it was this way or that way, everything would be different. So it must be this way. It must be the way I think it is, except I think we have to think about it the opposite way. This is the way things are, and this is the way things work. Now let's figure out how to properly classify it.
All right. So
a lot of people will say, sorry. Well, I was going to get into here's where we can get into morality. Here's where we can get into morality. So, for example,
before that, these types of questions where, like, okay, this is how it is. Now we'll have to like make our decisions based off of that. For certain things like free will and determinism, I'm not so sure that they can be proven exactly. So like even the empiricist himself, David Hume, showed that you cannot really like prove causality. You're just kind of inferring it. Your brain is kind of imposing it onto the events that are happening. And you're presuming that cue ball A is causing cue ball B to move, when it could be the fact that cue ball B was going to move whether cue ball A hit it or not. That would be something that, like, if we were watching a screen, like it looks like, oh, the ball hits that screen, and that's what causes it to bounce over to the other side. But it's really just the fact that it was animated to do that. There was no actual causal force of hitting the screen that caused it to bounce the other way. What caused it to go the other way was the animation keyframing. And the same for free will. Like, sure, we can, it feels like we have free will, but this is only trapped within our own subjective experience. It might be the fact that free will is just sort of a necessary precondition to a subjective experience that doesn't necessarily show there to be any actual basis for it. It's just the fact that being a evolved creature where you have you interact with other creatures in which you have to survive, this creates a feeling of moral worth or subjectivity to things, in which having a feeling of agency made it more evolutionary beneficial. That might be an explanation that certain determinists just evolutionary biology in general might explain for things. So if it is a case that we cannot determine whether or not we have free will, I think our next best option is to look at what are the practical outcomes that result from whether we have free will or not, and then make our decisions based off that.
No, I think I agree. And I would just say, I think, first of all, I think, to some extent, I think it's sort of colloquial of just the way I frame it as, I don't think it makes a huge difference. So it's really just important for conversations, pedantic conversations like this, in a philosophy class or just people who like talking about these ideas. I don't think we should be basing our life choices in a major way on our decisions, because I think the processes that are important here, for example, morality, responsibility, and whatnot, I think play the same role either way. So think about morality. People will say, well, if we don't have free will, that morality doesn't exist. Well, what is morality? There are a set of norms that play a pretty important role in our decision-making processes. The fact of having these feelings of morality, so we have, feelings of empathy, we have feelings of right and wrong, play a role in our decision-making. Our thoughts about morality, our deliberations about morality play a role in our decision-making. And it plays that role whether or not we have free will. We don't, if we say, well, if we don't have free will, get rid of morality, that doesn't really make sense. Morality works. We've been debating morality for thousands of years because it plays a hugely important role in social development for humans. It's there. It works. We don't say, if you just say, we could say, let's just get rid of it, but then it's just not playing a role, and our feelings will still be there. So that'll be there, but maybe the intellectual stuff won't be there.
So I think I could make an argument even within the framework of determinism for holding to free will. So it's the case that I have been deterministically ingrained to hold that cheating is wrong. And I realized that, okay, for people that have a belief in determinism over people that have a belief in free will, they are more likely to cheat if given the opportunities. Therefore, even deterministically, I can say that it is better to hold to free will than it is to hold to determinism, because less cheating occurs.
Right. Or, I mean, and again, well, this also brings in the thing of the noble lie. If we think one is better than the other, should we just push it? I think it sort of breaks the other way, in terms of responsibility. I mean, we could also say, well, think the pain in cheating is pain that exists because of a breakdown of trust. That's I think what causes that horrible harm. We feel trust is important. When someone cheats, they've broken a trust, and that creates a sense of harm. Now, you could say, in a similar way, well, there were a set of environmental circumstances that led to, it may be, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm spitballing here. It may be that we're actually better off having less of a strong, of such a strong
opportunity.
Just such a strong emotional reaction to cheating. I mean, look, most marriages end in divorce. We're doing something, I don't know with most, but at least 50-50. I'm divorced. We're doing something wrong. Mine didn't involve cheating, but there's the fact of, I'm trying to think of how to say it. It may be that, what if we had a system where people, just like we said with the crimes, are more understanding and looking towards, rather than, I think let me frame it this way. I think one of the main psychological effects of not believing in free will is you're less worried about retributive justice and more worried about rehabilitative justice. And that's a big thing with me. I'm far less worried about who's at fault. I'm much more concerned about, how do we stop this bad thing from happening in the future?
Right. And this is something I absolutely agree with. And I do see it as one of the detriments that you could have. What?
Concept how to just have to concept how you heard it here. Oh, wait. Oh, hold on. Did he say that? He may have said that in our private chat.
Oh,
he said you heard it here first. POD is up for cucking or something.
No. So this is something I agree with. I think there is a benefit to holding other people as if they were deterministically caused. And I recognize that this is sort of a bit of a contradiction within my own worldview, if I believe that everyone has free will. Now, for myself, I don't know, this might be a sort of a cheaty workaround for this, but I believe that I should only hold people morally responsible for things in which I have a certain amount of control over them. So, like, for me to say,
okay, but now we have to dig into control here. So really break down what you mean by control in this instance, because this is important. Where we have to get away from, I think, the broad concept and say, what do we mean when we say you have control over
right?
Something?
Okay, so I might have to explain it somewhat through negativa, where I do not hold myself responsible for your actions unless I was the antecedent cause to certain of those actions. So, like, say you went and took $20 out of a wallet that you saw in a coffee shop. But the reason you did so was because I told you, hey, that's my wallet. Can you grab $20 from it? But I was lying to you. That would be an instance where I would not hold you responsible, as in, like, for stealing there. I would hold myself responsible. That might be, and okay, so within, what is control here? Control is, I guess, what is control? Where the object that performs an action was the, I don't know, cause of the action. I don't know.
Like think about it this way. What is the role of holding somebody responsible in our society? What is the role of responsibility in our deliberative processes, in how we interact with one another?
Mm-hmm. So consequentially, it is the like, say somebody performs manslaughter through drunk driving. We hold them morally responsible, even though they were drunk at the time. And so they're the ones in which we put it, like, because we don't want that person to drunk drive again, we lock them up, or we put certain restriction or inhibitions on him. That is a way in which, like, we hold someone morally responsible for an action.
And we also, and another part would be the fact that I could get in trouble for doing something may stop me from doing that in the first place.
Right.
If I think, if I know I'm going to hurt somebody, if I know there's a big chance that I may hurt somebody by driving drunk, that can form a pretty strong role in my decision not to drive drunk. If I'm going to drink, give your keys.
Right. And so we have a certain aspect of like choices for what we're going to be doing, because based on what the consequences of those actions will be.
And so would you say that role of responsibility would be different whether or not we're free? And my position is, whether we call it free or not, the role that responsibility plays, there's still, first of all, we're still an agent. And I agree with you. When it's an internal decision, I'm still a deliberative system. I'm a deliberative agent. When I make a decision, if I make a decision to drink and then get in a car, I am making that decision. And there is a utility to holding that I responsible. All
right. This kind of confuses me a bit, because like from the deterministic, like the psychological studies for people that believed in determinism, they don't hold people as morally responsible. So I think there is a certain extent to a difference between whether free will exists, or, like, even psychologically speaking, versus if determinism is true, that people will hold other people to be more or less morally responsible for their actions.
Well, and listen, part of this could be about instruction. I think it's a mistake. I think people who think people are not responsible without free will, I think they're making an error, because I think the way we define responsibility still applies. What I think we have is, what I think we're more justified in, and here, in a way, we don't control this. I think when we think of people as having less control, we're less angry about it. And we can focus more on how do we prevent the conditions that led to this happening from happening again, versus, oh my God, I want this guy punished.
Right. And so this is kind of like what I was saying, that I sort of want to create a robust worldview in which I don't put off moral responsibility or blame for my own self, but I am more willing to do so for others, because I think, because the other people are outside of my control, whereas my own self is, at least to a certain degree, within my control. And so I only want to hold people morally responsible for things insofar as I have a influence on their actions.
Sorry, you want to hold people responsible when they have influence on their actions?
No, when I have when I have control over their actions. So, like, if I was a parent, I would say that I have a certain amount of responsibility for the actions of my child due to how I raise them. But I don't have moral responsibility for other people's children, because I had no control over them or ability to enforce.
But they have their own moral responsibility, right?
Sure.
They have their own moral responsibility. And I think we agree there. My issue is, I think that's the same whether we consider it free or not, because I think it plays the same role. I think,
well, psychologically speaking, that's not true. Like, people hold a different amount of moral responsibility for people if they think that they were deterministically caused to do a thing, or if they were free will caused to do a thing.
Right. But again, we have to differentiate between they're doing that whether or not the will is free. And again, it comes back to, like, I think my argument is roles of responsibility are justified whether or not we have free will.
Yeah, that's
Now,
where I would disagree.
I think no, but I think we can deliberate, we can debate as to how much, like where the emphasis should be. I think the emphasis should be more on rehabilitation than on punishment. That said, I think there's a role for punishment. I think punishment, holding people responsible, plays a huge role in our decision making, both from just the fear of being punished, and we have things we can't help. We have guilt. We punish ourselves. We have these instincts of punishment. I think we have that again, whether or not we have free will. I think we can debate which emphasis should be on which. But again, you see what I mean? That's irregardless of whether it's free or not. That the argument that if we don't have free will, there is no morality, I think is wrong. I think morality exists even if we don't have free will, and because it plays the same causal role that our thoughts about morality play a causal role. They're part of that chain of events.
See, this is where a couple things. I would say that because morality exists, or because we act as if morality exists, we should hold to a worldview in which we can kind of make sense of that. And I think that morality only makes sense within a agential actor free will sort of way.
Now, no, but I think we do have agency. We do have agency. So this is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think we should hold to it regardless. There are good reasons to hold to it regardless. We should not get rid of morality. I think it makes sense.
I want to hone in
either worldview.
Right. I want to hone in on this point of disagreement then, because I do not think that a person should be morally blameworthy for actions that they could not have done otherwise.
Now,
and I think
what if our thoughts of morality would change what actions were done?
For the other person, or whose thoughts?
If
my thoughts?
Let's
bring in an example.
Let's take a thought experiment. Where everybody doesn't believe in free will, and we have dispensed with morality. Does that lead to good, or does that lead to different results without morality playing a causal role in our deliberations?
Sort of a dialectical, materialistic conception of the world.
Maybe I never understand. I'm not good at understanding what that.
I do think that would have practical differing results, because within dialectical materialism, a person is unable to kind of change their ways of thinking due to they are a bourgeoisie, and so the way in which they've grown up, they're always going to think like a bourgeoisie would think, and therefore we have the right, I guess. I mean, rights doesn't really make sense, you can't say you're morally justified for an action if determinism is true, but you have the, I guess, a capacity, and a capacity in such a way that does not cause guilt within you to kill them for not working within your system of utopia that you're planning to bring about. Now, just you say, to imagine a worldview, a world in which this does take place, and I think within dialectical materialism, that it would be such a worldview, and we actually have historical accounts of such a worldview being put into practice.
Okay, let me ask you: do you think the way you're saying it, you're excluding morality from the causal chain?
Okay, so I think that
you're seeing it as a part it's something we impose on top of our decisions.
Yeah. So if determinism is true, morality would only be the positive or negative valence that we have towards events within life. And so there is no morally justified reasons to do one thing over another. It's just whatever we feel like doing. Because morally I agree with Kant where ought implies can. So if I cannot do otherwise, then I have no then like I have no moral obligation to do.
But our decisions have real effects, right? So somebody kills somebody else. That has a real impact on my life, on everyone's life. I can make a deliberation and say, you know what? That has a negative impact on society. Therefore I say killing is wrong. I mean, we can go deeper into that, but saying that killing has a bad impact in a society where anyone can kill at will, that's a terrible place to live. And I can come to that decision regardless of whether I have free will, that killing indiscriminately leads to terrible lives for the citizens in a community, and therefore I call murder immoral.
Yeah, and that's a easy position to take when you live within a society that is so where killing is not really a necessary prerequisite for people like Marx or the other people attempting to bring about a communist revolution. Their belief is that capitalism or the bourgeoisie are bringing about a worse state of affairs for society, and so it is morally justified, insofar as you can really use such a term, to kill them so as to bring about something that's better for society.
Okay, but we can debate that, right? And we could and maybe there, like, I think we all agree there are circumstances where killing is moral. For example, self-defense. We would say killing is moral. So I'm not saying killing as a whole is immoral. Let's just say there are certain circumstances where I would say, and even the Marxist Leninists, I mean, we saw what those societies who tried it turned out, and they didn't turn out that well. So I would still say that Marx got it wrong, and that, you know, even if you have to have a revolution at some point, maybe there's a better way than just killing all your enemies. But that's, we don't have to get into those weeds. But my point is that our deliberation on the effect of killing indiscriminately exists whether or not we have free will.
Oh, yeah.
And we can deliberate and see that this kind of action is bad. Let's just short form it to bad. And therefore we call that moral. And whether or not we have free will, the thought that this is bad, maybe I shouldn't do it, is important. I teach my kids it. I drill more of these type of things into my kids. Don't hit each other. They have the instinct to hit. Don't hit your brother. Don't hit your sister. Don't hit. And eventually, hopefully, they will stop hitting, because hitting, we say violence is a pretty bad way of resolving minor petty disputes, right? And the fact that I think it's wrong plays a role in their lives.
Okay, so that's a great point, and I'll actually sort of use that as a backing for this other syllogism that I have regarding my argument from consequences. Can you see? Oh wait.
Yeah.
Okay, good. If determinism is true, the belief in it runs counter to the production of actions we see as being morally good. So this is where I brought up the examples of people that do believe in determinism versus those that don't. Are more likely to cheat if given the opportunity, steal if given the opportunity, or I think the example that they used was like they're put into a room with somebody that they're led to be annoyed by and dislike, and then they're given the opportunity to put hot sauce in their food, and they know that the other person really hates hot sauce, and so the people that were primed with determinism put more hot sauce than the people that believed in free will. And so they're more likely to enact it's not really retributive justice. It's more to do with like aggressive, or it's just aggression in general.
Let me ask you, in that case, what do you think would happen if the experiment was a little different, and whatever thing they're told to read is something explaining along the lines of what I've said, which is that morality plays a role whether or not we have free will, and that it creates a good society when we're more moral, it benefits everybody, including ourselves. What if that was the article? If the free will article was done in that way, what do you think the experiment results would be?
I still think that the fact by referencing morality in either a active sense or in a passive sense really changes the way in which we think about it. So if I think that I'm being acted upon by laws like gravity, where I'm not the controller to my actions, it's just whatever feelings I have or whatever morality that I was ingrained into me as as I was growing up, versus I am responsible for every moment that for every moment and choice that I make in my existence, which is a much more active term, I think.
What I'll give you is I could be much more convinced that we should be careful of promoting non-free will, even if it's true, because of this type of thing. I think that if we're going to promote this, we have to be careful. Like I'll be honest, I don't hear a lot of people. I think a lot of people jump to wrong conclusions about the implications of not free will, which is what we've been talking about. I think they draw incorrect conclusion, but I think I could be convinced that there's not much we can do about that, and that maybe we need to have some sort of noble lie and just we have to be very responsible. Sort of like I don't believe in God, but if there's somebody who was in Alcoholics Anonymous and attributed their belief in God to their being sober for 12 years, that is not a person I'm going to have a debate about whether God exists, because there could be a just negative result. So you have a much easier time convincing me of that. Now, I think a lot more research has to be done, because I think with proper instruction, I don't know that these negative effects. I mean, I don't think I have these negative effects because of that. I mean, honestly, I can't think of, now maybe subconsciously, but in my daily life, I can't think of times where I don't think I've ever consciously said, well, there's no free will, so I'm going to do this bad thing. I can't ever remember having that thought, whether it's subconsciously in there. I don't know. I mean, I know, I've had issues with depression where you sort of sink into it. Well, things are bad, and you just sort of sink into it, but that's not quite the same thing. Now,
I do know, at least for myself, speaking with some people, that when confronted with a moral wrongdoing or error on their part, they used determinism as sort of a justification on their part for having committed the act. And so I think there is a way in which we sort of give ourselves leeway by referring to, the causal chain of events caused me to do this thing that I know is wrong, but I did it anyways, and I couldn't have done otherwise. So, I mean, I'm not technically responsible for that action.
Yeah, and I think they're wrong. I think they technically are responsible. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to define morality in that way, because I think responsibility plays a role. Well, listen, we could call it something else if you wanted, in the non-free will way. That if you want to use a different term than morality,
But
I think if we accept that morality. No, if we accept that morality, our concepts of morality, our feelings of morality play a strong causal role in our deliberative processes, then we have to say it's real. Like it's a social construct, meaning we cobble together, we categorize certain types of thoughts as moral, but they're real and they have a real impact. They really form part of our chain of events. So I don't care if we call it morality, call it whatever we want. If we want to differentiate, choose another word. I think effectively it's the same. But again, I could be convinced to say, yeah, but we should shut up about free will if it is going to cause people, like, I think we have to be responsible about who we have these conversations with and how we have these conversations. That I think I think people sort of
use it as justification.
Yes, but I think they're incorrect to do that, meaning they are immoral. And we've had a conversation before, and we'll have another one, I guess, on objective morality, which we can't.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But that sort of plays in. I think morality plays a role regardless. But again, I think we have to stay away from. We got to be really careful of saying, well, because it may have a negative effect, and I think we both kind of agree there's pros and cons to these beliefs.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, and listen, we could sit down with a piece of paper and we could calculate all the pros we can think of and all the cons, and okay, is it 50-50? Is it 70? Like, which one has the balance? But it's a different question from whether free will is true.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So it would be like, I know for certain scientists, and like as was used regarding the lipid experiment, it like some people assume that whether or not we have free will or not is sort of a empirical question that we can discover. And if that is the case, then I guess we could have a conversation over what sorts of tests could falsify or prove, or could falsify either determinism or free will if they are incompatible with each other, which I guess from your position, they're not necessarily.
Well, the way I frame it is I can't conceive of free will, of free as a trichotomy with determined or random. I can conceive of determined or random. I just don't know how to fit in free that doesn't end up being a mixture of determined and random. If you really dig into it, it always seems to fit into one of those other two.
Well, that's the thing. And so I actually agree with you there, because I agree partially to the for the determinist argument. If everything is deterministically caused by prior reasons, then that's then we are not free. And if everything is caused by random things that kind of pop out of our control, then we're also not free. Now, I think the way in which I partially went into it, but maybe I'll go into it a little bit further. I don't think that either singular one of those is true necessarily. I think there are both random things, and I'm using random in a epistemic sense as well as a ontological sense, but I don't think that's really necessary. Random things that are random causes to events, and I believe that there are reasoned causes to exist, reasoned causes to things that come about.
Sorry, reasoned or determined?
Determined. That's the thing. So if determinism is true, or actually if free will is true, we would accept that everything is determined by something. They would just say that, okay, the determination of an action is the self. And that is kind of the stopping point. I mean, sure, you could say that the efficient cause to the self is the parents having sex and raising the child. That would be the cause to the self, but that's not to say that, the reason that I chose Taco Bell today was due to, well, I mean, in a sense, it's due to my parents having sex, but it's not.
Your parents
like
having sex was necessary, but not sufficient to choose Taco Bell. Yeah,
there you go. Oh gosh, where was I going with that?
We were going, where does the free fit
so
in?
Yes, so from the sort of chance plus choice understanding of free will, there are undetermined things like possibilities that, or options that come into my conception when I'm thinking, or that come into my mind when I'm thinking about something, and I can choose one of those things. And the choice there, I know it seems almost like an infinite regress of using choice in order to
just pause. Pause, break down choice. I've defined choice as a deliberation of whatever the options that we came into my minds, or a calculation. How would you define choice? Or describe it, not define it, but how would you describe what is going on when we choose?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, among options, a single one of those is picked. I know I'm just using.
So break it down. What do we do what is picking?
Okay,
like, so if you had to break it down as minutely as possible, thought to thought to thought, how would you describe it?
Okay, so being like the very act of choice itself, I can imagine, or how I guess to put it to an image, I can imagine a branching road in which there are multiple avenues that I could go down. And then to choose is to walk down one of those avenues.
Well, wait, no, hold on. Well, to choose is to decide to walk down one of those avenues, right?
Yes. I mean, the avenues are like a mental image for each of the different thoughts that I might have. So one avenue is Subway, one avenue is
you're
Burger
saying
King.
Mentally is to go down an avenue, and that's the choice. Okay.
Yeah,
and not to actually physically go down.
Right. Yeah.
So would you call that how would you differentiate that from calculation?
Okay, so I think for calculation, you would only ever result in one specific thing. So like if you run an algorithm, you're always going to receive this one specific answer based off of all the things that you input into it. It's always going to result in that one answer. Whereas being a choice, there is a I guess the possibility to take a different answer and it still being a legitimate response. Like if I input into my calculator 2 plus 5 equals 7, and then I did it again and it equaled 9, I'd say, oh, this calculator is broken. But if I gave, say, my buddy Matthew, say, hey, do you want to go eat at Culver's? Or, hey, do you want to go eat at McDonald's? The fact that he chooses Culver's one day and McDonald's the other is not a breaking, like, what's wrong with you? I thought you liked Culver's.
Are those the exact same? Are those the exact same process time? I mean, I think
for the calculator itself, it's not the exact same process either, because like it's a different moment in time when I'm running the calculation on the calculator.
Sure, but I think we've been listening to Vervaeke's lectures, and one thing he talks about is the combinatorial explosion. Mm-hmm. And I think when we make choices, there are so many factors that go in that we're not aware of, but they're there and they're different every time. So, for example, I have certain feelings. I have certain hunger pangs. I have certain cravings
or distractions.
Right? When or a thought comes to mind, and I think I smell McDonald's, and suddenly I want McDonald's. Or I smell something else, or I see a commercial for something. So every time we make this deliberation, it's going to be a little bit different. Meaning, we're not going to algorithmically. Although my kids, if I ask them, or even myself, think of foods you don't like. Algorithmically, you're pretty close to always going to choose the same thing, unless you can be convinced, like, I really should, right? Mm-hmm. But when we have this choice, there's so much options that is it really not algorithmic? You have to fit in those hunger pangs as part of your decision, the feeling as part of your thinking, of your deliberation, the thoughts, the smells, the images, all of that comes in. We can't probably map it out. It's too complicated. And I don't know, who knows with quantum mechanics, quantum computers, maybe one day or whatever, but we can't model that right now. But aren't they there? Aren't all those things there as part of your decision?
Right. I just don't think those things have any causally determining powers within themselves. I think that, so my argument for that is the fact that they are contradictory to one another. So I might have the desire for Mexican food, and that's kind of putting a little bit more influence towards me for going to McDonald's or for going to Taco Bell. Sorry. I might also have this desire to, I really want a cheeseburger. That's like two desires I might be having at the same time. Now, if these desires had causal power, then whatever outcome that they were expecting or preferring would be the result. But because it is the case that I have multiple contradictory desires, there must be some sort of superordinate, choice maker that accepts or rejects accepts one specific or composition of desires, but it's not like those composition of desires.
But do you have access? Do you believe you have access to that?
To my desires?
Do you have access to the decision-making process for how you exclude one part over the other? I think
I would say it's similar to like when I'm focusing either on one conversation in the bar or another conversation in the bar. There's these desires that are within my right brain that's kind of poking its way in, and I can focus or unfocus on any specific
But
one
wait,
of those
let's stick
desires.
to the restaurant. Let's stick
Yeah,
to the restaurant deliberation. So you have this mix of feelings, like hunger pangs, like just your gut instinct of what you feel like. When someone says, "Oh, what do you want?" You sort of pause and you think, "I kind of feel like Chinese food today." You have maybe concerns about your diet, about your weight, about your income, about whether you have food in your fridge or you have to go to the store, how tired you are that day.
right.
There's
And
all
these are
these factors,
all,
and we could list an immense amount of factors, and they are all included in the deliberation. But I don't believe you can state how you excluded this, and that, and versus that, and that. There's too many factors, and we're not even consciously aware of all of them. But they have an effect, meaning let's just say you say, "Hey, where do you want to eat?" And I just ate. That's going to have a huge impact on my decision of where I want to go. Well, I'm already full. I don't care. You choose, right? Like every one of these things plays a part in the deliberations. We have conscious access to some of it, but we don't have conscious access to a ton of it.
And I agree. Where for the things that we don't have, where we don't have conscious access to things, I cannot see how we are free for that thing, unless we're referring to like a conscious decision that was made prior to that. So
but don't those unconscious aspects have just as much a role as the conscious ones, if not sometimes even more?
No, at least from my model, the unconscious things that are influencing our behavior. Yes, they have if I hit my kneecap and my leg bounces up, that's an unconscious reaction to something, and I'm not morally responsible for that because it wasn't within my conscious.
Why did you choose the kneecap example right now? You were consciously chose it. Why did you choose it?
Yeah, I chose it intentionally because it pops into my mind as an example of something that is not deliberated over or reflected upon.
Why didn't you choose an elbow or your ear or your toe, stubbing your toe? Why did you reject stubbing your toe, your elbow, or I forget which one you chose, but why did you reject all the other infinite number of body parts that you could have used in that example? Why didn't you choose biting your tongue? Why?
Right. None of those popped into my head. Now, one did pop into my head, and seeking out something quickly, I sprang to it because it fulfilled my need. If one of those other examples came into my head, I would either think, okay, this will do, or no, I need one more second to think of something else. And then I would maybe get a different response and say, no, that's no good either. I'll go back to the first one.
So this is what this is what I can't figure out. When I dig deep like this, I can't find the free. I can't.
Well, I don't think you have a model for what free would be. So there's no, that's the thing. If you have no conception of what a free will would look like, then how are you supposed to recognize it in our explanations of what it's like to experience conscious thinking?
But I think it does. So we're in this situation. This is my situation where I think the random determined model fits, and I can sort of explain all this. That model seems to fit everything that we're talking about. Whereas free, it's just the main thing I have with free is I feel it's free, and I kind of want it to be free, but it just seems to be there. But when we dig deep in, we have to be careful. We can't equate conscious with free. Conscious does not equal free. We can have free consciousness, or a lot of things. I hit your funny bone. You have a conscious experience of pain, but you didn't choose.
Right. So I would say that free will would be a subsection of consciousness, because there are certain things like you can direct consciousness, but it's not like you have full direction of consciousness. Like if somebody hits your funny bone, you're going to experience that tingling no matter what. I mean, you might be able to focus on different things, but it's still going to kind of be there to some extent, at least.
Well, so have you meditated at all? So think of that moment where you realize your mind wandered and you direct your attention back. That realization that your mind wandered then leads to the decision, because you've been trained that way, to bring your attention back. Where's the free there, right? Well, let me ask actually, does determined not seem to fit that?
Yeah, I'd say it wouldn't, because
scenario.
I don't know, maybe it's like determined is like the third person perspective of a action being made. So like if you're saying it like the response to your mind wandering is to return back to it. But I would say like if it was a cow, something like that, and I a cow was in my yard, my own cow, and then it started to wander off. In response to the cow wandering off, I grabbed a bucket of grain and shook it, and then the cow comes back. That seems like the way in which I would describe deterministic things. I mean, but of course, that's just a third-person perspective of a cow's response to my shaking of the grain.
Well, and
it
may
just be the case.
Cows like the sound of food shaking, whatever, and that there's a good chance if you shake it, the cow's going to hear it and is going to do it. Now, you probably didn't consciously think all of those things, but they were part of your deliberative process. That's why you chose to shake it. You probably didn't think, oh, if I shake this, the cow will hear it, or not. You probably just reached for it and shook it, right?
Right. I'm pointing out that it seems almost as if when I'm trying to describe free will, I'm doing so from a first-person subjective perspective. And what the determinist does is to re-articulate it from a third-person objective perspective.
No. I think I agree. Some do. That's a mistake, I think we have to include, that's a mistake I think a lot of people make. The first person is part of the causal chain. I am part of the causal chain. Otherwise, we're just talking about compatibilism, what's external to me and what's internal to me. But I am an information processing thing. I'm a system, right?
Well,
and
okay,
so my thoughts, our deliberations are going, like, we have synapses and it's sending electrical signals, and like Concept just says, conscious mind utilizes the subconscious systems for automation stuff, like searching for something that relates to the factors your conscious mind is searching for. And it does this in a fairly organized way, maybe sometimes disorganized way, but that's part of it. You've got to include that in your web of cause and effect. It's a mistake to think of the I as exterior to the system. We are part of the system.
All right. So yeah, that's a good point that we can maybe bring up then, is what is the I? Because I know that you accept the cogito ergo sum, that there is some sort of I, there is some sort of self. Now, I would say that the same reasons that we might accept the cogito as being a fact of reality, we could potentially do the same with the subjective experience of free will. So because let me see if I can find the exact cogito that I had it written out here somewhere. So because I experience the world as if I have control over where I focus my attention, and using the same I there as I would for the cogito, where I think, therefore I am. So I experience it as if I have control over where I focus my attention. Therefore, I do have control over where I focus my attention. Is that a logical
again, what do we mean by control? Break down control. What happens for there to be control? Like, what are we talking about? Like I think part of the problem here, I think cogito, we can conclude that something, that I exist. Meaning I am a thing that thinks. I don't think I can make any other judgments about what I am, right? Based on cogito. Like I may not be a body. I may not be a human. I may be a mind in a vat. That's just as consistent with cogito. All I can know from cogito is I exist. So the system the thing that is thinking exists. In terms of deliberation, I have an experience of deliberating, but I don't think that feeling. I don't think
Well, that's different though from what I was pointing out. Like an example of free will is the focus of attention. That I don't know if that's necessarily a deliberation because it's like a creative process where
but do you think a focus of attention can go on in an unfree way?
Yeah. So like if a loud noise happens near you, you might respond to that and focus on it just automatically without your conscious intention.
So how do we differentiate what is different between a free focus of attention and an unfree? What can we grab onto to say this is the difference?
One thing I guess would be internal versus external, which might be working into your compatibilism. So something that is an external cause to my focus of attention would be an unfree focus of my attention.
But again, why like okay, let's focus a bit on the I. Let's just say like if what I am, if my let's just say IIT is correct. If IIT is correct that my conscious experience is because of a system of integrated information, would that make it compatible, all these experiences compatible with determinism, that it's the system of processing, but this internal system, meaning this whatever this stuff in my head and my body, this loop.
So I don't know, maybe I don't have enough understanding of IIT, but I like if I think of a computer as a system of internal information processing, I don't think that a computer has any sort of subjective sense of self.
Right. In IIT, when at least a digital computer, from what I understand of IIT, they think it sort of has to be in 3D space. Like if we could somehow duplicate a brain and a human, if we could like create a synthetic human, or then that would have a subjective experience. Or they think, for example, even a photodiode would have some sort of subjective experience, but it's in 3D space, not just digital. I think they don't think digital integrates the information in a way that would produce that sense of qualia. Like what I'm sort of way I see
digital would still integrate some sort of experience in that it's feeling like a positive flow, a flow of electrons, or not a flow of electrons. That would be sort of a informational distinction between what's occurring for the computer.
This is where we get into my deficits in understanding the technical aspects of what I read in IIT. But so I can only sort of take it as their explanations rather than, I mean, they have detailed models of how like the integration works. And from what I understand, from what I've read, sort of a digital computer would not have what they call phi. So whereas a photodiode would be a very simple system that would have a very small amount of phi. So it's not just that it's not just about complexity. I mean, it's all about how it loops and in 3D space. So
there are photodiodes that are in computers. Like
maybe that are part of it, and that photodiode may have a sense. There may be something that now I don't know. This is the theory. There may be something of what it feels like to be a photodiode.
Yeah.
But the computer as a whole wouldn't have an integrated sense of consciousness.
Yeah, and like I'm open, and I think there is a certain amount of explanatory power that panpsychism has. But I think in order for at least for a photodiode to have some sort of subjective experience, even if that subjective experience is either like on off or like I'm being electrocuted right now, or I'm not being electrocuted right now. That would have to have some sort of basis within panpsychism, where every atom or molecule or even quark has some sort of subjective experience that kind of builds up.
Now, IIT doesn't quite go that far. They'll go, atoms when they're in a certain format, i.e. integrating information, have the system as a whole has a integrated sense of consciousness. But I still get the sense that what I'm hearing from you is really focused on the differentiation between internal and external. And the point I'm trying to make is we can't exclude the internal from the system, that we all form, that we're part of the system. I mean, I agree with you. Like, this is why I say we have agency. the system that is me does make decisions, does have deliberation. So that in that sense, I think we do have agency. Like, it's not somebody else. It's not a different system. It's this system that is making the decisions. And
then why do you call yourself, or why do you think that you're a determinist or a compatibilist? Because that seems to me like a sufficient explanation for libertarianism or free will.
See, to me, that's
you're the internal cause of your own actions and choices.
No, but isn't that but that's compatibilism? Like that's really what, isn't that what compatible? Here, let's just look at it.
Yeah,
that's my compatibilism here. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is the thesis. Compatibilism is the thesis that free will is compatible with determinism, because free will is typically taken to be a necessary condition of moral response. Okay, now that's not the whole. Hold on.
Yeah, that's thing. Sometimes they don't have like the clear-cut definitions right there.
Yeah. No,
but of course, usually it's the case that the article itself is referring to like, okay, here's how some people have argued it for it, and here's how they've argued it in other ways. Yeah.
So here, for the classical compatibilist, free will is an ability to do what one wants, and so it is therefore plausible to conclude that the truth of determinism does not entail that agents lack free will, since it does not entail that agents never do what they wish to do, nor that agents are necessarily encumbered in acting. That sounds like sort of what you're saying. We have this I system that has desires and makes decisions to act on it, and that is therefore
right. But I think
free.
For the determinist / compatibilist, they would have to assume that there is a singular drive or singular desire that is most powerful, in which is causing the person to act upon it or decide upon it.
Yeah, but
rather than from my position,
I think I understand how you're seeing it. You're seeing cause in the sense of like, tell me if this is right. You're seeing cause in sort of the billiard ball sense, that a ball A hits B, which causes it to go into C,
or dominoes.
and so on.
Yeah.
Domino. I think what this ignores is information processing, which is a slightly different format. And we don't tend to think of information processing the same as billiard balls, although probably at the micro level, it's probably somewhat similar. But I think information processing is key here. And I don't know if it's properly described in the same Newtonian sort of sense of, cause and effect. But I know, like, there's qubits, like there's a quantum version of information theory, so that's why because I lean towards the IIT, I think of deliberation as a type of information processing. So rather than think of it as billiard balls, think of it as calculation or like information processing.
Okay.
And our consciousness is the subjective feeling of that information processing. Is that
right? Oh, well,
is that how I fairly characterize sort of how you are thinking of it?
Well, I mean, it seems like you're explaining it from a emergentivist point of view for consciousness, whereas
no, I'm not talking about emergence.
Okay.
I'm talking about like information processing, where you have a bunch of factors.
I guess it would really depend upon like what you're meaning by information processing, because like my understanding of information processing would like be for a calculator or a computer to run an algorithm, something like that, which would be still deterministic, but it's determined by I don't know, however it is that the calculator or computer was programmed to run, based upon like, okay, if you get A in this scenario, you're going to do B. If you get D in this scenario, you're going to do E. If you do F in this scenario, you're going to do G. Something like
right.
that.
And what if you get A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z? We probably can't figure out what that result's going to be, but there is a result that's going to be. And that's sort of how I'm thinking of what our brain's doing. Our brain is calculating a tremendous amount of information every second, right? Like, so it's hard for us to conceive of it because we can't model it. It's combinatorially explosive, right? Like there's too many factors, and most of which, again, I think we're not aware of. But
And I don't think our brain is pre-programmed for how to respond to all of the information that comes into us. I think there is a certain amount.
Yes, I agree. If by pre-programmed you mean somebody has deliberately, intelligently designed it, so to speak, programmed in this. But it has, but it does deal with information in certain ways, right? We have our synapses are sending electrical signals. We take sense information in, right? So colors, wavelengths of waveforms of light, wavelengths of sound. I'm maybe mixing up the terms, but information comes in. Plus we have the information going to our memory, our cognitive capabilities. All this information processing is going on. And like, do you think our choices, would you disagree that our choices are a type of information processing?
Are not, well,
and if they're not information processing, then what are they?
The way in which you're using processing sounds to me like an algorithm running. And I can see how
with maybe some randomness thrown in, possibly randomness thrown in.
Okay, so I don't think then it is, I don't think our choices are a system of information processing. Certainly there is information that's in our minds and we do make a decision based off of that information. But it's not predetermined by our brains or our unconscious.
Predetermined.
Well, that's what determinism means to me.
No, I think of, okay, here's how I think of predetermined versus determined. And maybe I'm wrong, but this is just how I've always thought of it. I think of predetermined as a play, as a script that has been written out. That is not how I think determinism works. I see it more as just a chain of cause and effect. The future has not been written, although maybe it's inevitable, subject to randomness, right? So I don't see it as a script.
Right.
That's now maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I think of predetermined.
Okay,
that
so
it's all been written out.
How I'm thinking of predetermined is where, given any sort of cause, the response to that will always be a certain way for that cause. Okay,
that's fine. I'm fine with that. Okay.
Say you have a Roomba vacuum or something like that, and it hits a wall on the east side, and then its response to that is always going to be moved to the west side or away from that wall. That seems to me like how I'm imagining predetermined, like it's programmed into the machine.
But do you think that we ever really do make, now not just like, no, I don't mean just at different times. Do you think we ever calculate the exact same factors each and every time, that we ever deliberate the exact same recipe of factors each and every time? Or is it always probably a little bit different depending on various other factors, including our mood that day, how much we've slept, how tired we are, what things our mind pulls up, what options pop into our head, and so on?
Yeah, I'd say they probably are different each time to a certain degree, which is why I think that to presume determinism is, it seems like, what is the practical purpose for presuming determinism other than sort of the beneficial outcomes we said, if it is the case that we cannot predict the actions of a person? Is it just for philosophical consistency, maybe?
I think it's a fascinating discussion that makes my head hurt, but I like having it for some reason. But I think that's a separate question. Why we have this conversation is different.
To me, it seems almost like a scientific hypothesis. Like, okay, we have hypothesis, compatibilism, determinism, free will. And then we have differing models for each of those, of course.
Sure.
And then which scientific hypothesis what explanatory power does determinism have if we cannot make predictions?
Well, first of all, I think we can make predictions. The whole marketing. Think of marketing. Marketing is based on the fact that our brains are pretty predictable and much more predictable than we'd like to think. That's why we're so easily swayed by marketing. They use very, very sophisticated manipulation techniques that they know, because from social science and psychology, that because brains work in a certain way, if we put these factors out there, we have a pretty high chance of. So I think there are practical results, but I still need to say that that's a separate question from is it true or not. I think it's a.
Well, yeah. I was meaning in like a scientific way in which we deliberate over the competing hypothesis. Like, what are the differing? Like you said that there's okay. So the predictions that it makes is in regards to how a human will act, given the assumption of determinism. Like, I mean, you can do marketing things like that.
Well, I mean that's one. I mean, public policy would be based a lot on the. I mean, listen, regardless of our thought about free will, the fact that humans often react in predictable ways play a huge role in our public policy. I mean, you know, how do most humans act in this type of scenario? Okay, we should have a traffic light there, you know. So I think now, I mean, but I
okay,
again,
so maybe the only ways in which I can conceive, at least, of what the practical differences would be between a deterministic theory and a like free will, personal responsibility theory would
Whoa,
be.
No, hold on. Don't add that last part. You snuck that in. I think there's personal responsibility either way. So
okay,
stick that
in. Yeah, it just doesn't make much sense to me, at least. Maybe we'll have to figure that out. How somebody can be morally responsible if they could not have done otherwise.
Because of the role it plays. It plays a necessary.
Like, due to the consequences?
Yes, it plays a part in our deliberations. And a very important part in our deliberations, in our feelings, in our thought processes. It plays that role that results in a better society. That's why we have these concepts of morality. If morality didn't have any utility, if it didn't benefit us in any way, I mean, we probably wouldn't have much of a concept of it. But the fact is, morality, our thoughts about morality, play a huge role in our deliberations and have a pretty big impact on our behavior because of that. Affects our decision making.
All right. Oh man.
But let's just go back. You're getting we've been going for a while, and I can see. And the way I want to do this series is I don't want to feel like we have to wrap everything up in one discussion. I mean, we could have a series of these discussions about free will where we build on it. I think what we have done tonight, which I really like, is we stopped and paused. And we've dug in. Now, that doesn't, we identified some areas of agreement, identified areas of disagreement. I'm going to be doing a video soon on what I think makes a productive discussion. And I think in that sense, we've had a pretty productive discussion. I think we're digging into these issues. I think we've done a pretty good job of isolating a lot of the areas where we agree and where we disagree. So we figured out what problem we have to resolve. You know, we're getting close to what is the difference in our opinion, and can we figure this out? So I think it's been a very productive and good discussion. And what do you think?
Yeah, and fun too, and finding out what are the actual points of disagreement and what are the actual points of agreement, because a lot of the times these types of things where I'll be arguing for my position without understanding that you already agree with most of that. It's just on this other specific thing that you don't agree on. So yeah, it would, at least we're getting a much better understanding of each other's positions pretty well. What do you think of the model of free will that I sort of laid out with chance plus choice, where there are indeterminate, there are the things outside of our control, and then there are the I guess the focus of an intention or attention onto one or multiple of those, or I guess it would have to be one of those, and then deciding upon that one. I think it would only really make sense if those are available options, really. But of course, I don't know.
I think we have to be careful with chance, first of all, because I'm very hesitant to say the things that pop into our mind are because of chance in an ontological sense. I think we don't have access to why certain things pop into our mind, but that
Right.
doesn't mean it's by chance. I think this information is held somewhere in our brain, and we don't have access to why the pathways went and grabbed that one and brought it back to our consciousness rather than grab something else.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have insights. We can say, hey, I saw a commercial for McDonald's, and that gives us some insight into why McDonald's popped into our head. I just had a dream last night about a friend I haven't talked to in like 10 years. I have no idea why that friend popped into my head, but there's probably some thoughts I was having and led to thoughts of the past, and it grabbed onto this person. Choice. I agree we have choice. I think we have to be careful of saying choice is by definition free. I think there's free choice and call it unfree choice or determined choice. And that's, I think choice means deliberation. And this is where we were, and I know we were getting tired, so I think maybe it was where we can start off from next time, is when we think of all these factors, I think our brains are doing calculations, are assessing our hunger, assessing our feelings, or assessing all these different these different inputs, call them factors. And it does a calculation and it comes up with, okay, this is my choice. And I think we don't have access to those calculations, but I think they're going on.
That's the thing. At least subjectively, we do have access to, like, in the like what it feels like to make a choice. We do have access to the calculations because we're the ones making the calculations. It's being done within our consciousness.
No, but I can just describe, for me, when I think of, okay, what do I feel like eating? I sort of go, and then it pops into my head, right? I don't have access to what happens between and it popping into my head. Like some parts
and I agree with that.
Like
think, there's going to be McDonald's that pops into your head. There's going to be Burger King that pops into your head. And then once these have popped into our heads, we have the capacity to consider these consciously in a way that, like, in the same way that you can focus your attention, you can focus your conscious deliberation over which one you're going to go with.
But again, I think we have to be very careful not to confuse consciousness with free, because I think we have to accept we know at least we have some unfree consciousness, right? So we know consciousness can be unfree. So we can't
well, I think I can distinguish my unfree consciousness from my free consciousness.
But I think it gets a lot harder when we break it down.
And that's the other thing.
This is where I think we should pick up maybe next time. Like, this is what I want to explore. Like, if we break it down, if we really reduce it, reductively look at this, what is going on? How do I identify what is the free part? Like I think this is what we've been missing in this conversation. I think we always get up to the edge of it, but then we go off into another direction. And I think this is my reason for not believing in free will, because I can't conceive of any coherent model that I could not fit into determined random, and therefore I could call free, something that doesn't match that dichotomy, that makes it a trichotomy. And I think you've talked about models that you think are compatible with it, and maybe we need to get into that a bit of how do we describe it. Like my point is, we have to be able to conceive it other than just sort of
right. So even using that dichotomy, every decision will be made either randomly or it will be made due to decisions. Now, determined due to reasons or determined by something. Now, if it is the case that the human mind can do things irrationally for random reasons or like randomly, and it is the case.
Hold on. Are you associating rational with
irrational
with random? I don't know that we can do that.
Okay, then I'll say arbitrary. Would that be a better, like, Okay, so the human mind can perform actions either for reasons or not for reasons. Like
Okay,
I have the
but as
ability
long
to
as we're
do
not just
either.
saying that they're necessarily conscious reasons, because I think we can perform actions for unconscious reasons.
Sure, sure, but we would be using a different word, reasons there.
I don't mean
So
reasons in terms of argument. I mean reasons in terms of causation.
yeah. Okay, so say okay, the human mind can perform actions due to conscious reasoning, or the human mind can perform actions due to unconscious reasoning.
Right. Okay.
I think that the human mind can do both. And
Sure. But
the
why is one free versus not free?
in order okay, so to perform let's see. The ability to either consciously deliberate over what reasons I will do for to consciously deliberate over reasons like for an action, or to perform an action without consciously deliberating reasons is a choice that a person has at any time. So there's no like I don't know what sort of prerequisite you would have for that other than the will, uh, and in such a way that was not causally determined prior to besides the will.
But what does that mean for something to not be causally determined by prior inputs? You know what I mean? Like to
It's
me
kind
that
of like
means
a stopping
random. But
point.
then what's the connection? What's the connection to 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 what we were doing before? Random. You know
I
what I
imagine
mean?
it sort of like the first domino is the will, at least for actions coming from the human person.
But again, be careful. I think we call it free will. That has to mean there's a that has to be opposed to unfree will. We can't just assume will means free. Like that's or we're circular, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because we're
So an
taught
unfree
we agree
will.
we have will.
Yeah. So an
We
unfree
we
will
both
would
agree on
be
will.
yeah. An unfree will would be a domino falling at a certain point in time, when and the fact that it could stay still at that point in time was not an available option. For a free will, the domino falling was an option being made, uh, in comparison to the dominoes standing still.
Okay,
Either
but
was available
do
to
it in
the.
terms now frame that exact same thing, but talk about it in terms of deliberation rather than just pure
Well,
dominoes.
I don't know. I think that's sort of, at least for something like that, it is sort of arbitrary, where there's not really a comparing and contrasting against information that's going on. It's just something that is performed without any such deliberation other than I'm doing this.
So then, but what if we are comparing and contrasting and we have these feedback loops that are going in all forward, backwards, sideways, and that Vervecki talks about scaling in and scaling up and scaling down. He just talked about in lecture that we're looking for this weekend of that we're doing all this stuff at the same time simultaneously. We have all these processes going on, going in different directions. I think we are taking all. I think we are doing what you just said. I mean, we are going in this direction. Yes,
Yeah.
Sam Bradley, we're still going, but we're wrapping
Yeah,
up because
we're wrapping up.
our thoughts are
Yeah.
becoming foggy. But
Yeah.
it's been a really great discussion, and we should, because our thoughts are getting foggy, we probably should force ourselves to
Yeah.
bring it to an end.
Yeah, good
And
idea.
what I may want to do is I'm going to listen to like the last say 20 minutes of this and try to take some notes for where, because I think what we've talked about in the last 20 minutes is where we could sort of maybe have as a stepping off point for our next conversation. But I think we really have done a good job for this first talk, and I hope what I'd love for people to put in the comments who are still listening is, what did you think? Did you find it interesting what we're talking about? Do you think it's worth listening to? Did you find it completely boring and you never want to listen to us again? But I'd like some constructive feedback. This is my first stream on my channel. I think we've done it a bit differently, at least than I've heard a lot of people have this kind of conversation. So I'm very happy about that, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I might do is go through this conversation, and what I'll sometimes like to do is, like, where it seems like somebody is making an argument, I like to put it into a syllogistic format where the conclusion that they're trying to reach necessarily follows from the premises. So even if like somebody makes an argument but doesn't do it in such a way that feels like their point is still being come across anyway, filling in where it's needed in the argument in order for the conclusion to logically follow.
Yeah,
and then
I agree.
That gives me a much better understanding of, like, okay, here are the actual arguments and here are the other arguments. Where are they agreeing? What premises do they agree on? Which ones do they disagree on? That's where I find it interesting.
And we've got some comments about defining our terms. I thought we actually did define some terms, but maybe we didn't define enough. So
yeah,
that's great.
I don't know. Okay, what would you define a free will? How would you define a free will?
Well, this is the tough one because I have a trouble conceiving it. So what I say is that something that's not determined, not random, but still fits within that model. So something that fills in the third prong of a dichotomy.
A square circle, you're
really
saying?
Hard. Sorry?
You're saying a free will is a square circle then? Has both round edges and also straight edges at the same time.
No, because it has to be. If all there is random and determined, then that, to me, it seems like a dichotomy, which covers 100% of the options. If that's true, then we don't have libertarian free will. And random, I've defined it as not linked to prior causes. I think we did define the self, and I don't think we defined will. I think maybe you're right, but we can do that next time. I think we have to hold on to our decision to stop because we could go on all night, and I don't think we're going to get better at this point.
I think you're right.
But I think we'll do well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we had an audience. That's great. Thank you for joining us. Please like, subscribe. I plan on having a lot more content, so a mix of other talks like this. I'm trying to schedule something in the next week or so with Andrew Stratilites on the ontological. Nice. On his version of the ontological proof for God. So that'll be an interesting discussion. I have my plans for my own sort of standalone videos, but I'm really bad at procrastination, so I've got to force myself to.
You'll have to ask him if the definition of God necessarily requires it to be something conceivable. So, like, if it's only a conception or an idea within somebody's head, like based upon the definition, the highest conceivable being. Like for a cat, I think the highest conceivable being would be that self-same cat, just because cats are narcissists. And I think that for like an ontological argument for the cat would be referring to itself, because the cat cannot conceive of anything greater than itself.
I mean, I know what I really want to focus on, that we started from a Twitter conversation, is, that the conception of something is different from the thing itself. And that's really where I have an issue of saying we can conceive of a God, but we can conceive potentially of the greatest conceivable being. I actually have doubts about that, but I'm willing to grant it for the sake of the argument. Let's accept.
Right. And this would probably bring in like an argument that you likely have, is whether or not our conceptions of things have any sort of connection to the reality itself. So like if I see an apple and I conceive of it in my own head, is there some sort of connection that's being had between the apple in objective reality and the idea of an apple in my head?
Yes, that's precisely what we started talking about, and then it got hard for Twitter, so we decided to move it to a voice discussion. So I have lots of stuff planned, and thank you so much, John. This was the inaugural stream. I'm so thankful for you to have come by and have this discussion. I think it was fantastic. And that's it. I want to thank everyone for watching. And again, please subscribe and tell all your friends. and I hope this is the start of some great content on this channel.
Looking forward to it.
And now I'm going to try to end the stream.